really inspires me and who plays a very, very important role. He's a journalist who has a passion for environmental stories. In fact, he's dedicated his entire career to writing about the environment in a way that ordinary people can relate to. And we heard a lot of the speakers today talking about how important it is to get their message through to the people, because conferences like this bring up a lot of great ideas, a lot of great solutions, and governments can take them over, businesses can work with them. However, if we don't change our behaviors on the grassroots level, if we don't convince each and every one of us of how important and urgent it is for us to really live sustainably, then we really can't achieve those goals in 15 years. So that's where Martin Wright, who writes very well, but also has a passion for these environmental issues, comes in, and he's going to be taking over from me. I would like to just say a few words to tell you everything, succinctly, everything he's been involved in. And Martin, can you please join me here on the stage? We can fight over, there are two mics, but we can still fight over them. But Martin is the director, come on over. Martin is the director of the Forum for the Future of India. He's an award-winning journalist who writes for The Guardian and many other publications, and we are very fortunate to have him writing. But he is the visiting judge of the Ashton Awards for Sustainable Energy. And he mentioned to me that this is one of the most important roles for him. Why is it so important? It's because it gives him a chance to go to Indian villages, and he says he enjoys nothing more than to go there and meet with the farmers, meet with the people who are really suffering from and feeling the impact of climate change. And that really, really gives him an enormous satisfaction as a journalist and as a person who's passionate about the environment. And Martin is going to share with us a story that's close to his heart, one of his favorite stories from one of these visits. So Martin, it's all up to you. I hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Ralitza. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge and humbling privilege for me to go out to the villages and spend some time talking to people for whom climate change is a daily reality, morning, noon, and night. It isn't just something that gets discussed in fora like here or in Paris or wherever. There was a recent survey by Terry done of people in India, and it found that no fewer than 90% of Indians believe that man-made climate change is a reality. So we've all got a stake in it. How do we engage the wider group, the widest possible group of stakeholders? That's the theme for the next session. I'd like to invite the moderator and the panel to come up onto the stage, if I may. And while they're doing so, I'll just say a few words. Your moderator this afternoon for this session is Nick Ishmael Perkins. Nick's director of SciDev.net. He's a journalist and media trainer with a huge amount of experience in the global south, particularly South Asia. And he's the co-founder of Media for Development. So I'm sure it'll be a fascinating session. I'll hand over to Nick. Thank you.
We're together again. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know that we have a slot after lunch, but we're here to challenge ourselves and our paradigms. And I'm sure that with the panel that we've put together, actually, we're going to have a very stimulating and disciplined discussion. I mentioned disciplined very deliberately. I have been advised as chair that given the fullness of the agenda that we have today and the fullness of the panel, that I can use any means necessary for us to get through it on time. So I apologize in advance if I seem a bit interventionist sometimes. Now, on the topic today, there is an African proverb that says, actually, if we want to go fast, you must go alone. If you want to go far, we should go together. And I think that the challenge that we have in sustainable development is that we want both of these things. We want political expediency, but we also want broad-based, internalized ownership. And what we're going to do today is to actually reflect on this a bit, on how we might reconcile this. And one of the things actually that strikes me is that when we talk about making a transformation to a green economy, we need to think about what that means for dependency pathways. And yesterday I was lucky enough to be part of the media colloquium where we spent some time talking about the rich seam of stories around these dependency pathways, which are essentially about the economic relationships and some of the socio-cultural beliefs that keep us doing what we do and make it difficult for us to make that transition. And of course, this implies quite a broad range of characters and a broad range of interests needing to come to the table. And it is around this topic that I'll be inviting our panelists to share their reflections. Now, because we have quite a full panel, what I'm going to do is actually introduce them just one by one before they actually share their reflections. And then we'll have a few minutes open for discussion amongst panelists, and hopefully we'll have time to take some questions from the floor. So the first person I'd like to invite to share their reflections is Mr. Gyan Acharya. And Gyan is actually originally from Nepal, and he is the Under-Secretary General and High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. And he's also a chair of the Global Coordination Bureau for the group of least developed countries, and was part of the 2010 Millennium Goals Review. Gyan?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Terry for organizing this wonderful event. I was here last year, but I think every year it is getting better and better. I think when I was asked to talk about all stakeholders' contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the climate mitigation, as well as adaptation to climate change, I was trying to look at it from the perspective of the most vulnerable countries, because that's my responsibility as well. And when I say most vulnerable countries, definitely the bottom billion. There are 48 countries which are considered as least developed countries by the United Nations. They have about 900 million people, and poverty is almost at 50% of the total population. Rural population is almost 70%, but the contribution of agriculture to GDP is almost 25%. And disasters are a regular feature, and frequently, if you talk about the meeting of the Millennium Development Goals, they are again challenged in terms of meeting many of the goals. In fact, none of them will meet all the goals. That is one of the defining features of the least developed countries. So that's where we have, if you like, the highest incidence of both poverty as well as deprivation. Now, looking at the impact of the climate change, I think we had a lot of discussions in the morning and the afternoon sessions. But when you look at that, I mean, all the things that we talk about, whether it is about the impact on agriculture, whether it is impact on diseases, or whether it is impact on the capacity of the resilient capacity of really dealing with the vulnerabilities, they are at the lower end of that capacity. Therefore, when you look at the all stakeholder, I mean, looking at the partnership at one layer, we must make sure that the new Sustainable Development Goal must be inclusive of all of them. The new climate change agreement must be inclusive of the challenges that they face. Now, when we look at the Sustainable Development Goal, again, unfinished agenda of the Millennium Development Goal has to be looked at. Today, even after all the efforts that has been made, of course, globally, we have made the poverty reduction, the goal. But if you look at if you just consider the disaggregated data, then you see that they are still the biggest challenge, and they have not reduced it by half. But even if they have reduced by half, it is much higher than even other developing countries. So that's the biggest challenge that is still they face, whether it is about health, education, and again, the poverty and hunger. Now, therefore, when we look at the eradication of poverty, we have to make sure that these people themselves are part of the solution to the problem of the poverty, hunger, malnutrition, as well as education. So, and again, when you look at the new issues, especially the energy was not there, infrastructure was not there, economic growth was not there before. But again, if we are really looking at the solution of the problem in these countries, we have to really look at the economic growth as one of the fundamental, the opportunity for them. Otherwise, you may have you may resolve some of the challenges related to health and education. But if you don't provide jobs, if you don't create economic growth, even the progress that you make on human development will not be sustainable. Similarly, if we don't deal with the adaptation issues, if we don't deal with the challenges that they face, many of them that I represent are also small island developing states. You have heard from the president of Maldives, the former president of Maldives, and many of them, they have a day-to-day challenge of, not only the ocean acidification, rising sea level, but also the artisanal, the fish farmers' livelihood issue is on the challenge now. So when you look at the challenges of all of these countries, we have to make sure that we look at the challenges of the farmers, challenges of the communities, as well as the challenges of the people living in the rural area. That's what we mean by, the partnership of all. Definitely, we have a report. Of course, the scientific community will be critical. We have to make sure that there is a very strong advocacy by the civil society, but it is equally important that the communities themselves become a part of this solution of the problem. Now, finally, I would also like to say that all these countries, although they contributed less to the climate change, but because they have a least capacity, they are the ones which are most affected by climate change. It is they who themselves are asking for an ambitious goal. They themselves are asking for a meaningful climate change agreement. And it is very important for us to see that there is also an opportunity, because these countries are still at a very low level of development. Therefore, there is an opportunity. If you switch into the low carbon path, perhaps you can leapfrog some of the brown industrialization that other countries have faced. So we have an opportunity as well. We can take it all together. Private sector has to play a role, because even in these countries, we have heard that they are not only looking at the ODA. ODA will play a very important role, but they are also looking at investment in energy, investment in infrastructure. We have to find a model to make sure that even in these countries, all the players, scientific communities, private sector, government, international community, as well as the community, the civil society, and the farmers themselves, and the people living in the lowest strata of the society are fully involved in dealing with the sustainable development goal as well as the climate change deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acharya. Reflecting on some very specific challenges and opportunities for a particularly vulnerable group of countries. Now we're going to move on quickly to Dr. Jaco Cilliers. Dr. Cilliers is the country director for the United Nations Development Program here in India. Before this, he was a deputy resident representative for UNDP in Uzbekistan and head of office in Cyprus. He has significant experience working in development and conflict areas with a specialization on sustainable development and political interventions.
Thank you very much. And at the onset, may I also take this opportunity to thank Terry for involving and inviting UNDP to be part of this distinguished panel. We are also greatly honored to be among one of the long-standing partners of the Delhi Sustainable Summit. And this year is especially important because it brings about a balance between some of the most pressing priorities of our time, such as increasing disparities between wealth and economic growth, crucial climate change negotiations leading up to Paris and COP21, as well as the deliberations to finalize the Sustainable Development Goals and the post-2015 development framework. The success of this year very much therefore depends on the increase in constructive collaboration between all interested stakeholders, including government, the business, private sector, civil society, international organizations, as well as research community and the local communities. The topic for this session, engaging all stakeholders for the future we want, is therefore indeed extremely important, not only for the future we want for our children, our grandchildren, or actually for future generations, but also to ensure the success of global priorities that will determine and will be developed this year. It is also encouraging for us that serve in India to have the privilege to work in this exciting time, and also to see the commitment of the government, as well as the personal attention that the Prime Minister is giving to creating some solutions that are really helping climate change issues as well. Our Secretary General was here last month, and he visited Gujarat, where he opened a 10 megawatt canal solar plant, which was really the brainchild and the idea of the Prime Minister, and also shows that there are initiatives and really excited areas being tackled here in India. In the 5 minutes that I have, please allow me to just highlight 4 areas that I think are key challenges, but also key opportunities, and I think in many ways will make or break the future we want. The first is, how do we manage relationships between those that are not like-minded and those that are not like-situated? As I attended the summit, I was reminded of a previous high-level meeting that I attended on the environment. I will just indicate that it was not here in India. But during the tea break, I was fortunate to stand next to the Minister of Environment as well as a prominent civil society activist. They were very passionately explaining to each other why their respective positions were very important for saving the planet. The minister said that the problem with civil society was that they were often like chickens with their head cut off, and they were running in all directions without knowing where they were going. He was obviously implying that you need to have a strong government at the top and that they can give direction to the rest of the people. The civil society leader, on the other hand, was using a metaphor of a house, and he was saying that if you don't have a solid foundation, you will never be able to build the walls that will eventually hold up the roof of the house. And doesn't matter how, if you don't have a strong base, the house will always collapse. From his perspective, he was obviously indicating that you need to have a bottom-up approach and that communities form a large part of society that needs to be involved in creating sustainable solutions. The real funny part for me was at the end of the tea break, as they walked away, the minister said to the civil society person, "You know what, I would really like to agree with you, but then we will both be wrong." And in some ways, it reminded me of the challenges that we face during these deliberations and negotiations, that idealism cannot really overshadow political reality. Obviously, the important point to highlight here is that you have to have both top-down and bottom-up approaches to really create sustainable development solutions. The second point that I want to highlight is that managing the complexities of issues have to be discussed in a healthy environment. If one considers some of the major challenges and thematic areas that will have to be agreed upon, such as patterns of consumption and production, malnutrition and poverty, growth and demand for energy, climate change, biodiversity, increased renewable energy, water management, it is understandable to assume that the task at hand will not be easy. However, as those dealing with chaos theory often reminds us, that complexity can often lead to immobility or to endless opportunities. The role of forums such as this, the DSDS summit that brings stakeholders together from various sectors, is crucial to ensure that everybody can also understand the benefits and the advantages from where they sit, but also that the ultimate goal of ensuring the sustainability of our planet are at the forefront of these important deliberations. The third point I want to highlight is how to change behaviors and attitudes and get people to buy in. There's a common saying in participatory development approaches that if you get people to weigh in, they will buy in, or alternative saying that people support what they help to create. As was mentioned by many of the panelists before me, it is clear that the debate on climate change has changed from one which was primarily driven by certain environment activists to one that are central to government policies and decision. It is also true that bringing about behavioral change is not easy, but as indicated by Darwin, it is not the most intellectual or strongest of the species that survive, but the one most responsive to change. In my last point, I think I want to highlight something that has come up throughout the discussions, and it's how we move from summits and workshops to action. I often tell the story that when I was working in civil society development organizations, we had three issues to consider. First, you see, then you plan, and then you take action. However, now that I'm working in the United Nations, I often attend workshops and seminars where the three terms are you see, you plan, and you put in a file. And I think this is the real challenge for us. How do we move from analysis and developing great ideas and policies to really constructive change that will benefit the lives of people and ultimately also the planet, if we take concrete action at many levels to bring about change and also implement these policies? It is therefore important that we don't just have climate change architects, but also really work on climate change builders. Therefore, at the end of my short presentation, I want to thank everybody in the room, whether you are an architect or you are a builder, for the important role that you play to ensure development efforts globally become sustainable. UNDP and the UN family looks forward to partner and also take action with you in this important endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cilliers, for some very sobering thoughts there about some of the conventional wisdom around sustainable development policy and practice at the moment. Now I go on to introduce Dr. Wakako Hironaka. And Dr. Hironaka is the Director General of Global Environment Action. She's also Chair of the Board of Earth, Water and Green Foundation. She's a board member for TERI and a former member of the House of Councillors and Vice Chair of the Democratic Party in Japan. She's held a number of public service positions of certain profile. And in 2010, she was awarded the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun from Emperor Akihito. She's also very kindly brought along some copies of the Earth Charter, which we will leave at the front of the stage here for people to collect later on. Dr. Hironaka.
Thank you. In the long history of humankind, there has never been an era that has had undergone such dramatic changes as in the 20th century. Scientific, technological, and medical progress has given humankind astounding economic growth and prosperity, as well as increased human longevity. However, we have to face with a series of adverse challenges, such as environmental degradation and the proliferation of devastating conflict. Economic growth has often led to significant environmental deterioration and has created disparities in wealth and social inequities. Furthermore, 2 world wars, followed by countless regional conflict during and after the Cold War period, robbed many people of their lives, their wealth, as well as their happiness. Medical advancement and improvement in public health has blessed people with greater longevity. However, now over 7.9 billion people populate the Earth, only home for the humans, and continued population growth will further burden the planet. If growing societies seek more affluence and wish to achieve economic success as industrialized nations have been doing, this will deplete the Earth's resources, leading to further environmental degradation. In 1992, the UN Conference on Environment and Development has held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, focusing on sustainable development. The Rio Summit adopted Agenda 21 and the Rio Declaration of Environment and Development, and ended with the successful signing of UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention of the Biodiversity, but the Earth Charter submitted by international NGOs could not be adopted. 2 years later, in 1994, a renewed push toward the creation of Earth Charter started with the initiative of Mikhail Gorbachev, Maurice Strong, Ruth Roberts, and from India, Kamala Chowdhury, and many others. Many participants representing diverse regions, professions, as well as age, gathered from various parts of the world to discuss the contents and drafted the draft. Finally, in June 2000, Earth Charter was officially presented at Peace Palace in Hague with the presence of Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. The Earth Charter is composed of 3 parts: the preamble, 16 chapters of the main text, of which each is dedicated to various aspects of Charter principles, and lastly, way forward. It is a declaration of fundamental principles for building a just, sustainable, and peaceful global society in the 21st century. The Charter seeks to inspire in all peoples a new sense of global interdependence and shared responsibility for the well-being of the human family and the larger living world. Our planet Earth must not end with our generation. We must hand its magnificent bounty to the next generation and beyond. This requires changes in our way of life as well as in our mindset to those that are sustainable and gentle toward the environment. We must move away from our current lifestyle of overproducing and overconsumption and wasteful disposal, and to put a stop to a loss of biodiversity and other serious environmental degradation. The Charter is an affirmation to protect the global environment as a whole, while respecting global communities and their peoples, cultures, and traditions. It is a promise to uphold human rights, to strive toward the eradication of poverty, to promote literacy, and to build a democratic and nonviolent society supportive of the rights of women and of minority groups. Since its birth, all across the world, wide array of effort has been going on to promote the Earth Charter with its headquarters in Costa Rica. The goal of the Charter are, 1, to promote the dissemination, endorsement, and implementation of the Earth Charter in civil society, business, and government. And 2, to encourage and support the educational use of the Earth Charter in schools, universities, and many other settings. 3, to seek endorsement of the Earth Charter by the United Nations. 6, in Japan, we organized the Earth Charter Asia Pacific Japan and have been engaging in various activities to promote the Earth Charter, such as translation of the Earth Charter into Japanese, publishing Earth Charter brochures, booklet, and mangas, musical performance by UN Classic Live, Our Blue Planet, lectures at universities and civil society meetings. Last November, Earth Charter International, as well as Earth Charter Japan, were among the active participants in the event Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, organized in Nagoya, Japan by UNESCO and Japanese Ministry of Education, Culture, and Sports. I sincerely hope that the audience here will join me in promoting the Earth Charter principles among your family, friends, colleagues, at your community and workplace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hironaka, for sharing with us the Earth Charter, an important instrument to support and facilitate cross-sectoral collaboration. Now, I'd like to introduce Professor Pavel Kabat. Professor Kabat is the Director General and Chief Executive Officer of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, an independent global science to policy institute. He is also full professor of Earth System Science at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and he was a co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 with the IPCC. He's won the Zayed International Prize for the Environment, and he's been knighted by Queen Beatrix in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear audience, dear colleagues, friends, dignitaries, it is a great pleasure to stand here again after 1 year to represent IIASA, International Institute, with 22 member countries behind us, more than 2,000 scholars. We are ready to greet again this fantastic summit organized already for 15th times by my good colleague, dear friend, Rajendra Pachauri, and all his collaborators. I am academic, so I will start with the classification of stakeholders, if I may, to frame my story. I have academia, governments, private sector, civil society, arts, and media. And I will concentrate in my short intervention on 3 examples of stakeholder interaction. Number 1, science to policy, science and government. As I mentioned, I'm representing here academic community, and I'm going to make a plea for the academic community to become a really partner in terms of implementation. We got used too much to academic publications alone. I have done statistics, and believe me, out of 10,000 publications appearing in the leading journals around the world, only 1% end up finally at the level of policy making. Now, there is yet another need which I would like to call for in the stakeholder partnership. The science, even if successful in preparing scenarios for the future, which are then hopefully useful for forming policies, is leaving the stage too much too early. Example, IIASA, together with 300 partners around the world, coordinated a major study into the energy futures, launched to the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at Rio Plus 20, called Energy Assessment Globally. At that time, we have prepared outlook across the sectors for the whole world and for the countries, including India and China and others. At that time, we have prepared the costing of the picture, and response was overwhelming. This community, led by United Nations, started a program, SC for All, Energy for All, where currently 500 billion pledges are part of the portfolio. However, implementation is underway only 2 years. Meanwhile, the science has a different boundary conditions. Just think about the price of oil. In 2012, it was about $120 per barrel. Now it's 44. Can you imagine how much it does to the system when you would redo the scenarios again in the partnership 2 years after the act? So I think that what we should consider science to become a real partner, a real stakeholder along the whole chain of the implementation of the actions. We cannot leave the stage too early. To this effect, IIASA, together with TERI and other partners around the world, are going to launch the project World 2050, which is the first of its kind to be a partner to the implementation strategy of the SDG to be adopted hopefully in September this year. Second example, this is a surprising one, I believe. Even within the stakeholders, we have problem. I'm going to concentrate my example on the cross-sectoral partnership stakeholder. I mean benefits of thinking and acting out of the silo. We are siloed, terribly siloed in the implementation space. We are siloed as a scientist, disciplinary. We are also siloed in terms of governance and legislation. Every single country, including mine, I'm from Netherlands originally, is structured by investing into the portfolios through department and ministries. We have a budget for energy, budget for climate, budget for environment, budget for water. And usually, like in every democracy, we do compete for these budgets in the parliament, and et cetera, et cetera. Going back to the same study I cited, Global Energy Assessment, when we were given the charge by Secretary General in 2005, it was the energy charge. Can we calculate feasibility of doubling efficiency of energy? Can we calculate feasibility of increasing the renewable share? And mainly, can we calculate benefits of getting access to the energy to 2 billion people who don't have it? We said, Secretary General, this is too much to silo task. We would like to do it also for climate because energy sector is connected to climate, isn't it? 90% mitigation in the climate goes to the energy sector. We also included air quality because we can do air quality calculations and health. Now, bottom story is, if you do the costing of the sectoral measures to achieve the energy goals and the climate goals and air quality goals and health goals because of air quality problems, altogether staggered in the classical way, you need about 2% of the global GDP, 2% of 100 trillion. If you do this in a partnership, stakeholder dialogue, across the ministry's investment, it's 40% cheaper. So I'm calling for the stakeholder dialogue within the elements of the stakeholder landscape, which is within the government, within the ministries, within the investors. Don't compete, collaborate. Last example, communication. We do underestimate completely, entirely, the role of the media and communication in our enterprise. I think communication and media should become partners rather than independent evaluators of what we are saying. Because they are powerful, and they are powerful in putting narratives. One example I'm going to end. I was privileged to be member of the Prime Minister of Netherlands high-level committee called Delta Committee, which was set up to design the Netherlands' future infrastructure protection against flood and sea level rise for 100 years. We were successful in putting up a study which was adopted by Dutch Parliament and which became a law, which is committing Dutch government to spend 2 billion euro every year for the next 100 years in giving into this new infrastructure. I was the one defending this to the Dutch Parliament. And when I was coming to the point of cost, I said it will cost 2 billion euro a year. And then there was a conservative member of parliament, I'm not saying the name, who said to me, Mr. Kabat, you must be completely mad, asking for 2 billion at this time of crisis. I said, Mr. XY, do you own the house? He said, yes, I do. How much is it worth? He said, €500,000. How much do you pay for all the insurances, fires, etc.? He said, number. I said, this is about 5% of your income. Do you know, Mr. XY, how much is 2 billion from the yearly income of Netherlands? 0.1%. Communication, positive narrative, be positive, look at the chances as stakeholders rather than painting big, gloomy pictures on the wall. Thank you.
Thank you very much. An issue which is very close to my heart, and I think a well-argued one. I'd like to introduce Dr. Bindu Lohani, who is the Vice President of the Asia Development Bank for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development. In his 25 years at the ADB, Dr. Lohani has been Special Advisor to the President on clean energy, climate change, and the environment. He also has a doctoral degree in environmental engineering and is a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science.
Well, thank you very much. Since yesterday, we all have been hearing two very important agendas, the SDG goals and the climate agreement, hopefully in Paris. Everybody has been saying, and it's very well understood, that everybody has to be part of this. All stakeholders have a responsibility. And everybody hasn't fully said, but should be saying it, we also need to have enough financing to be able to support these agendas. So what I thought I'll do this afternoon is what we, Asian Development Bank, a stakeholder in both of these agenda, SDGs, as well as the climate change, is planning on how to do the financing. First, on the Sustainable Development Goals, we're working collectively, all the multilateral institutions, ADB, World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, IFC, and others, are trying to collectively assess the financing needs for Sustainable Development Goals. Huge number. And then having done that, again, for all the stakeholders to see what we can do. Now, those of us who remember MDG, we know it did not get fully funded. There are still so many unmet agendas. What we did and what we plan to do is exactly what we did in the case of MDG. We will take the SDGs goals as they are relevant to multilateral organizations like ours, and then we will include in our investment dialogue with all the countries where we work with, and then financing will be provided. And that's exactly the approach we are planning at this point in time. In that process, we do leverage, because there are leverage money. There are countries who would rather like to give it to us to invest on their behalf, rather because of their own constraints. Now, on the climate change side of it, the need for the climate change climate financing is huge. We know that. So what we've done is, first you change your strategy in the bank. We changed our energy strategy to say, let's move into renewables. Let's move into clean energy from fossil fuel. In the urban area, let's start building green cities, the resilient cities, smart cities. Let's take the transportation, say, move away from the roads and do more on our railways, metros, etc. I mean, these are a strategy you can change the bank organization so that it will already be filtering. And that's how, with that in help, we've been able to do we do about $15 billion a year. Out of that, we've been able to do about $3 billion just on clean energy. Out of that, $2 billion maybe on the mitigation side, $1 billion on the adaptation. Globally, if you look at the flow of the funds in 2012 and 13, it's about $330 billion. But most of the money has gone towards mitigation. And only about 9 to 10% of the fund has been adaptation. Adaptation is an unfunded agenda even today, and it's going to be even bigger in future. We have to put more focus on financing that. If you look at, again, the private sector the private sector has done quite a bit. About 50% of the resources came from the private sector. But again, all, if not all, almost all came for the mitigation. So again, they have to gear up to do more adaptation work. This morning, you might have heard my president say there's a possibility of doubling our resources. If we're doubling our resources within our own resources, we certainly hope we will double our commitment to that. In addition to that, we need to be more innovative on mobilizing more resources. Yes, government budget needs to increase, but there are countries in Asia who's already taking the steps to reduce subsidy of the fossil fuel. Those money, if it goes to the renewables and other clean energy, that will make a difference. At some point in time, in one form or the other, people are putting price to carbon, whether it's carbon tax or one form or the other. We have created a carbon fund just to be able to be helpful on that kind of things. We've created green bonds, about water bond, clean energy bond, climate bond. This is to ensure that those money will only go to those investments so that we lock them early on. We should also be cognizant of the fact that the world donors, others, are providing in the world the Global Climate Fund, about $10.2 billion, which is coming, soon to be made available. Now, my problem is, even if those money were available today, 10 billion extra, I won't know how to spend in the countries. The countries don't have the ready-made projects. They may not be ready to use that kind of money. And I also am not ready to do yet another $10 billion yet. So we all need to shape up to see how to scale that up, our organizations, our capacity to be able to this money which is coming in future. And I am sure more will come. So in this regard, therefore, we just need to improve our knowledge sharing agenda. There's a lot of learning to do, how others have done it, and how that could be done in our part of the world. So that's why one of the agenda for the Asian Development Bank is knowledge sharing. We come to events like this to find out what all we can learn to do better. And that we pass on to the countries as well. So again, thank you very much, and we'll be quite happy to discuss with you on the financing side of the climate change and the SDG in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lohani. Some interesting reflections there on the difference in objectives and modalities for stakeholder engagement around mitigation, adaptation, and scaling. Now we're going to move on to Professor Kazuhiko Takeuchi, who is the Senior Vice-Rector of the United Nations University and Director and Professor of the Integrated Research System for Sustainability Science at the University of Tokyo. He has served inter alia as a member of the Science Council of Japan and a Vice Chairman of the Food, Agriculture and Rural Area Policies Council. He was also Editor-in-Chief of the journal Sustainability Science. His particular area of interest is a harmonious coexistence of people and nature.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the detailed explanation of my career. I'm very glad to be here. I would like to echo with the previous speakers to thank Terry and Dr. Pacioli for inviting us to this very important DSDS event. I would like to talk about the issues related with the importance of the stakeholders' engagement for the sustainable future. I would like to start by saying that the importance of engaging all stakeholders for achieving global sustainability has been discussed for many years. For example, if you look at the previous Rio summit held in 1992, it was almost 20 years ago when the member states started signing two very important UN conventions. One is UNFCCC, and the other one is UNCBD, as already Madame Hironaka explained. And also at that time, the Rio Declaration and Agenda 21 were adopted, which formed the basement of global partnerships. However, if you look at the Rio Plus 20 held in 2012, again in Rio, where the future we want was adopted, and a process in develop a set of SDGs was launched. The new types of partnership among NGOs and civil societies began to transcend the framework of nations through their activities. A wide range of partnerships and open discussions was further promoted as information and communication technology develops. Many people I saw during the Rio Plus 20 are communicating with the ICT. In other words, partnership approach has been repeatedly emphasized as a key to achieve a sustainable society. The recovery from the triple disaster in 2011 in Japan offers various implications in partnership among different stakeholders. A partnership could serve as a driving force to recovery through the participation and collaboration between various stakeholders, including international organizations, developing countries, international and local NGOs, private sectors, and the people, academia, and many volunteers, as well as people affected by the disaster. It was the first occasion that so many international agencies came to the affected areas to support the affected people, as well as the international NGOs. And therefore, we recognize the importance of creating a partnership of the different levels, including the international and national and local stakeholders. They strengthened the partnership, shared information, and complemented the effort by other stakeholders to implement recovery activities. Japanese National Preparatory Committee for Rio Plus 20, who submitted the statements of Japanese stakeholders for the promotion of sustainable development to the Rio Plus 20 Secretariat, recognized that such partnership holds the promise of improving the people's problem-solving skills, and not only in unusual circumstances, but also in the broader contents of building the sustainable society and solving various global challenges such as climate change and loss of biodiversity. Building our sustainable and resilient communities, lessons from the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami was organized as a side event of Rio Plus 20. The objective of seminar was to deliver a proposal from Japan which highlights the strengthened bond or ties that were recognized during the recovery process after the triple disaster. It also urged the international community to encourage participation of every stakeholder to build a sustainable society. In the outcome discussion of the open working groups and the synthesis report of the SG, the post-2015 agenda, public participation is highlighted as an indispensable aspect of the SDGs. Participation of related stakeholders, including major groups, has been encouraged in the process to develop a set of SDGs in 2015, this year. A multi-stakeholder process gains attention not only in the discussion in the UN, but also at the national and local level. In DSDS 2012, we discussed how to preserve global commons with the attendance of Professor Elena Ostrom, who unfortunately passed away. We recognize the necessity of integrating global and local commons to form multi-level and nested structure of governance for global sustainability. Establishing institutional arrangement of multi-stake governance with active involvement of all stakeholders working on both global and local levels seems to be a key for realizing the future we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Takeuchi, drawing on the experience of Japan there. Now, we have about 10 minutes. In fact, I see less than 10 minutes, probably about 5 minutes for discussion. So I'm going to open the floor so that we might take some questions. I see there is a lady at the front here. Can I ask two things of you before we give you the microphone? First, to identify yourself, and secondly, and even more importantly, to be very, very brief, because as I said, we have about 5 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. This is Sana here from the Nalanda University, and I'm here as a youth leader. My question is for Dr. Jaco Cilliers. I'd like to know that what is the United Nations basically doing to ensure that the diverse voices of billion-plus people of India is being incorporated or listened in the formulation of SDGs, that is Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. Very important and very brief.
Well, I think it is indeed a great challenge, but I think the UN family has worked actually very closely together over the last year and a half to work with a number of stakeholders within India, whether they are sitting in women's group, whether they are farmers' organizations, industrial organizations, and various civil society institutions, together with academia and others, to form stakeholder groups where people can voice their needs and also their ideas for what should be included in the Sustainable Development Goals. It's very exciting because we estimate that about 400 million people's voices have been heard in this process, and these inputs have been defined and also presented to the government, obviously, for their larger term deliberations. So this is a very exciting way of at least getting people from various groups at a large scale together, and I think also the contributions of the whole UN family to do this has been very important for setting those goals.
Okay, more questions? We have one at the front here.
Thank you. I'm Chaitanya Kalewar. I'm from planet Earth, and I describe myself as a planetary patriot. So my question is, since most of the problems in terms of climate change are funding problems, and besides, of course, attitudinal problems and habit, since on our planet, it appears that 1% of the people own half the wealth of the planet. I'm trying to find out if you have assessed where these 1% people want to go. Are they going to stay here, or are they going to take off? And what are your assessment of reaching out to this 1% of the population which owns half the wealth?
Thank you very much. I'm going to take a question from the lady here on the left-hand side as well.
Hello, distinguished panel. I'm Ananya Dasgupta from All India Women's Conference and YWCA. I'm also a part of the Women's Major Group, who have been constantly on to discussions with the proposed 2015 goals. My question is to Professor Takeuchi. So, with the Art Summit to be a success in 1992, and Rio Plus 20 in 2012 was not a success at all, what do you feel that COP21 in Paris would bring a success after the Kyoto Protocol?
Thank you very much. And there's a gentleman just in the center there. Yep.
Hi, I'm Ritvajit. I'm a national consultant working on energy management mitigation part, also a leader with Climate Reality Project. My question is for Mr. Lohani. Being an Asian ADB, being a sector-specific think tank, you mentioned that most of our attempts and activities on climate change is basically mitigation. 90% of the climate address issues that we address are in the mitigation part. We don't think of adaptation part. So again, we are forming INDCs, and after we don't know the clear picture what is going to happen with adaptation. Is there any concrete agenda that ADB is working to lead on policy or whatever aspect on adaptation specifically?
Okay. Dr. Lohani, maybe we can start with you respond to that question. I'd also be interested to hear your reflections on the question here about the 1%, given that you spent some time talking about funding.
Well, first, if I understood the question right, the adaptation, the funding for the adaptation is inadequate, which is about 9 to 10% at the moment. But look at it this way, the impact of the climate change with the natural disaster plus the frequency of the events will create lots of impacts which will be related to mitigate the adaptations. Any way you look at it, the size is very big. First, let me tell you what we are doing within the organization. What we are doing now is we're reviewing every development project, all projects. They will have to go through not only environmental screening, they go for climate risk screening and natural disaster risk screening. So what happens is, if you're gonna, give an example, let's say you're building a hydropower plant. So we'll see whether the rainfall will be same, whether the watershed will change, and therefore that will have implications on how you design the projects. Similarly, if you're designing a coastal road, what will be the impact of the sea level rise on that road? And that means you would start doing a very detailed vulnerability assessment at the local level. This kind of assessment is not available. You'll see IPCC report which says this part of Asia will be vulnerable, this part of the country is vulnerable. But I need to know if we're making investment right on that particular location. It needs a lot of detailed work at the local level, which sometimes at the local level we don't get enough capacity to do that, but we end up doing it anyway. And this adds some time to the cost. And the questions comes in, sometimes the government asks us, this is an extra cost I don't want to bear. This is because of the climate risk. Find me some cheap money. And that's why these kind of various funds that we have, Climate Investment Fund provided by the donors, the Global Climate Fund in future, and our own fund, we will try to absorb as much possible without creating burden to the countries. That's our agenda. But we are only a small player. But we're hoping that by bringing this kind of skill to the country and helping build the capacity at the country level, it will be done for all the countries. The history is the same, like you will remember, Dr. Hironaka, that in the environmental business 30, 40 years ago, it was very difficult to integrate environmental component in development projects. Today it's routine. So we'll have to face this challenge and build capacity for quite some time. And when it gets fully integrated, who would not like a climate resilient infrastructure? Everybody would like it. You would not, similarly, when you do the agriculture project, who would not like to ensure that the production the yield that you are likely to need to have will be assured. So those kind of, I'm talking too long, but giving you a little bit more, because it's a complex issue. Sometime you may need to get into insurance business, reinsurance business, because sometimes the probability of happening that is, sometimes we don't know. You can't say with 100% this will happen, but we know it's likely to happen. What do? You can buy insurance, just like health insurance. So we also need that kind of structure to be developed in the future. We're looking all of these within the organization and hope we'll be able to help the countries to do the same, as well as learn from other parts of the world which already has such system. Now, 1% of the wealth, we need to go back and tell these people, please help on climate change. Some of them are providing it, like we do get some money from Melinda Gates Foundation, they give us, so we do some noble work. I think more and more CSR responsibilities, we see it happening. We might need some different kind of people lobbying them. We're not very good for that kind of people, but there may be some other people who may be able to go and tell them. This morning, Lord Preston mentioned about the Davos as the place, maybe.
Dr. Hironaka, does the Earth Charter have anything to say about the 1%?
Thank
the Earth Charter, how does that engage with the 1%? The question around about the 1% and how do we engage them in supporting efforts to finance adaptation and mitigation?
The 1% rich.
Yes. Does the Earth Charter, yes, does it provide any ideas, any inspiration around how we might engage that group? Not really.
You know, I might add to this, if you like that answer for this gentleman, which asked a very difficult question. What we are seeing is, this is my personal view. I've been in this business long, just like her. Sometimes these institutions, these individuals make a lot of money and say, okay, I made so much profit, let me take a piece of it and give it for CSR. It may be climate change, it may be for environment, etc. To me, that's only second best. I'm also a bank, multilateral bank, but I want to make sure that my whole operation is sustainable. Right? So you need that commitment first, and also you need their 1% of that money to give to the CSR. I think since they have no capability to do on your own, I hope we can get this messages right. Yesterday in the CEO's forum, this came up well, but I was very impressed with everybody who was there. Some of them might be in that 1% company. Mm-hmm. They were very committed.
Yes, very encouraging. Now I'm going to turn to Dr. Takeuchi and the particular question, yes.
Yes. I would like to respond to the questions from a slightly different angle. The problem of the Kyoto Protocol is concentrated only the issue of CO2 reduction, focuses on the countries in the developed world. What we need now is to invite the countries, including the developing countries, how we could get the consensus in order to invite all the countries around the world. In order to achieve this, the idea needs to be further developed to be more inclusive, to combine with the poverty issues, to combine with the sustainable development issues. That is the reason why the Sustainable Development Goals is important, because this is the merger of the previous Millennium Development Goals, which focuses on the development agenda, and also the global environment agenda, including climate change, biodiversity loss, and many others. And so if we need to combine these two, you need to have the holistic approach to give the integrated answer to the people so that people can really motivate it to promote, to achieve the CO2 reduction as a result. But not just to discuss about the CO2 reduction, but to include all other important issues. That is what we need to establish as a post-Kyoto Protocol, and I hope that this negotiation could be obtained at the Paris conference in the end of this year.
Thank you. Gyan, you wanted to make a very quick comment around the adaptation fund.
Yeah, the adaptation fund. I think, one of the main issues that is, going on in terms of the negotiation in IPCC is about the Green Climate Fund. And you have heard that there is already about a $10 billion plus, which has been committed so far, but the aim is to reach $100 billion. And the discussion that are going on within the negotiating groups in the IPCC is to divide that Green Climate Fund between mitigation and adaptation, 50% each. So we do hope that the idea again is that if you only deal with the adaptation but not deal with the mitigation, then you will continue to adapt to it, so you will never really catch the situation. Similarly, if you only deal with the mitigation, then the poor countries and the poor people will be at the receiving end because already damage is done. So the idea is to really get both the mitigation and adaptation issues duly prioritized in terms of funding out of the GCF. That is the issue which is still being discussed. I hope that will be finalized by the Paris Agreement.
Thank you. I'm going to abuse my privilege as chair and ask the last question. I'm going to go to Pavel for this. You told us a very compelling story about an important bit of micro-advocacy, your exchange with the Dutch minister, and I'd like to know what came out of that. So after you explained the case, relating it to his personal financing, how did he respond?
Well, of course, this was a case which was successful, otherwise I would have told you. So the Dutch parliament and the Dutch government adopted the plan. It was a big success of short-term communication. But it was also a lesson in terms of how we communicate these big issues. I mean, we are too much too used to, as I said, paint colorful maps of all the problems, all the disaster problems. And I think it's opportunity too. We should be much more positive. We should see this as a crossroads situation. I think the development agenda, climate agenda, all connected, is a major opportunity to innovate at all fronts. This is actually what this little anecdote was meant to be about.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's a very nice note on which to end. I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing. Yes, did you want to make a comment very quickly, Dr. Hironaka?
Yeah. If you read Earth Charter carefully and understand, perhaps people would agree to tax more heavily on those who have, or there would be more people who are willing to give money, donations, to the people who really need.
Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you to my panelists for sharing their thoughts and their time today. And of course, a big thanks to Terry for inviting us to be here and for convening the event, which continues to be clearly a landmark in the sustainable development discourse and policy agenda. And thank you all for your attendance and your questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. There is now tea, and the only place in the whole of Delhi, I am assured, that you can get tea is over here in this room. And the reason why we've arranged that is to ensure that you do all stay in your seats, and come back to your seats after getting your tea, because we're going to move swiftly on to the next session in a few minutes.